Hi, my name's Janelle, and in this series I'm going to be showing you how to go from knowing absolutely zero about sewing to being able to make your own wardrobe. I don't use big words or overcomplicate things. I just plan on showing you what I've learnt over a decade of making my own clothes and share all the tips and tricks I've learnt along the way to make sewing a whole lot easier. Like a lot of hobbies, sewing can be quite expensive, especially when you're first starting out. I was a teenager when I first started sewing and literally had next to no money to spend on it, so here are my best tips for saving money when sewing. Tip number one is to thrift for fabric and notions. This is my favorite tip for saving money when sewing and something I've been doing ever since I first started sewing as a teenager. Thrifting for fabric, particularly bed sheets, is a good way to get a lot of fabric for very cheap. Bed sheets are big. Even a single-sized bed sheet will give you around 2 meters of fabric at least, and the best part is it's sustainable. Using secondhand bed sheets is ultimately recycling fabric that already exists and would otherwise end up in landfill. And if that isn't enough reasons why you should use bed sheets in your sewing, they also have a lovely, soft, worn quality to them, which honestly makes the loveliest clothing, and they often have the nicest prints too, especially some of the older bed sheets. As well as fabric, you can also pick up buttons, zips, threads, and a whole heap of other notions at the thrift store as well. In particular, buttons can be very expensive when buying brand new, but buying a pack of buttons from the thrift store can be super affordable. Tip number two is to find the clearance section at your local fabric store. If you're in Australia, like I am, Spotlight have loads of clearance fabrics all of the time, and you can often find lots of good stuff amongst it, starting from around $5 a meter. Tip number three is try to find some remnant fabrics. Similar to the clearance fabric, ask your local fabric store if they have a remnants bin. Usually when the bolt of fabric is near empty and there is less than a meter left, often it will be discounted heavily and put into a remnant bin. This is a great way to get good quality fabric for cheap for smaller projects, and was one of my favorite parts of working at a fabric store because we always got first pick of the good remnant pieces. Tip four is to borrow a sewing machine from someone you know. Instead of just buying a brand new sewing machine, see if you can borrow one from someone first. Back in the day, it was quite standard to have a sewing machine, even if you weren't technically the sewing type. And so a lot of people, maybe even your parents or grandparents or an auntie or a family friend, might have a sewing machine tucked away in a cupboard somewhere that you could borrow for a little while, at least to make sure you actually like sewing before you invest in a brand new sewing machine for yourself. Alternatively, you might be able to pick up one secondhand for very cheap on Facebook Marketplace, or even thrift stores sometimes have good quality sewing machines available as well. I've shared a video all about how to use a sewing machine and what to look for when purchasing one, which I'll leave a link to in the description below so you can check that out if you want to. Sewing patterns are expensive, so my next tip is to find free tutorials here on YouTube. I have a heap of free sewing tutorials on my channel, and I'll leave links to some of my favorites in the description below. And the best part about a YouTube tutorial is that you can actually visually see how to make the thing, whereas sewing patterns usually only have written instructions, which can make sewing them quite complicated at times. I'll also leave a list of some of my favorite sewing channels down in the description below if you'd like to go check those out as well. If you did want to start sewing with a pattern, then I also have my own collection of sewing patterns available, which all come with video instructions as well as written instructions. And if you did want to check those out, I'll also have a link to them in the description as well. Purchasing a sewing pattern from me is an amazing way to support me and my channel, and allows me to continue making helpful sewing videos for you. Tip number six is to salvage fabric from your old clothes. Something else I used to do a lot when I first started sewing was salvage fabric from my old clothing. Not only is this a free way to get more fabric, but again, it's a great way to recycle items that would instead just go to landfill. You could turn your old clothes into a new style, kind of like a thrift flip, or use the fabric for smaller projects such as my 10-minute sewing projects, which are basically just small, quick sewing projects that are perfect for practicing a whole heap of different new sewing skills. And I'll leave the playlist for those videos down in the description below. So I hope you found these money saving tips helpful, and if you've been following all of the videos in this Sewing for Beginners series, then you are now ready to get practicing. And in the next episode, I'm going to be sharing what I think is the perfect beginner's sewing project: pajama shorts. So make sure you subscribe to my channel so you don't miss out on that. Thanks so much for watching this video until the very end, and I will see you in the next one.